Okay. Hello. How is everybody? Feels like August, right? What in the world? Okay, who owns a mid-century modern house? Who owns a mid-century house? Okay, there you go. Careful to describe it. Okay, so welcome to Buildings and Brew. I am Brent Hull. I am the owner of Hull Millwork and Hull Homes. This is 7th talk we've given, so we're kind of coming to the end of this little series. Today we're talking about Levittown and mid-century architecture and design. We're really talking about post-World War II till about 1940, 45 to 1960. So should be really fun. If you've ever wondered, why new houses are ugly, this is why. You're going to learn in this talk what happened to housing, what happened to design, and the war kind of blew everything up, literally and figuratively. And so I think this study is fascinating, and I also think it's a little bit tragic. So I've got mixed feelings. I want to thank my sponsors, Kukin Brothers. I was told it's not Kukin, it's Kijken. Who told me that? It's a Dutch name. She's left. She came here and told me that, and she left. Oh, there you are. See, there you are. You're hiding back there. So Ryan Mokeen, if that's true, you guys need to change your name. And when Windsor won, of course, those guys. And then we just picked up a new sponsor, Rockwool, is sponsoring these Buildings and Brews. So we're very excited to have them on. We've kind of stopped doing foam insulation on houses, and we're moving to a Rockwool, some different ways of thinking about insulating. So excited to have them on. Okay, here we go. So Levittown and Mid Century Modern. Everybody heard of Levittown? No? William Levitt? Okay. So we're going to talk about life after World War II, what happened with this 20 years we'll talk about, the style of houses and kind of what happens with design and style. It really takes a back seat to speed and production, and we'll talk about that. That's the tragic part of building that we're going to be talking about. Rise of production builders. Realize that before 1945, there's no such thing as the D.R. Hortons, right? There's no such thing as the large production tract builders that are building thousands of houses a year. This is when that starts. And then our legacy, what we're dealing with today because of how they taught and talked about building. As you know, on these Buildings and Brew, we started with Georgia and Federal. We talked about the United States. We kind of capture a time period. And so 1950, population 150 million, color TV, Elvis Presley, kind of a cool time, right? Wouldn't want to list it, but we got nuclear subs, Leave It to Beaver. These are the big cities. Notice Los Angeles has popped up there now. Los Angeles booms after World War II. And you'll start to see a lot of West Coast and southern cities show up in there when you get to the 60s and 70s. All right. So we kind of have to go back before we can go forward. And part of what you have to understand about 1945 and 50 is what happened before then. And so the Great Depression happens in 29. Everybody heard the Great Depression? Okay. Bad times, right? Housing starts as lowest in 1933. I'll talk more about that. There's almost 1 million housing starts in 1926. By 1923, there's barely 100,000. So there is a dearth of houses that have been built. The building starts to kick back up, and then the war starts, and then they ration and they say you can't build houses at this time. So for 42 and 43, you weren't even allowed to build. And then we get out of World War II in 46, and we start rocking and rolling. Now, what's interesting is that that's very clear from this is that the U.S. comes out of World War II as strong and as powerful as they've ever been, maybe their most powerful time. Realize that Europe is completely rebuilding. Every major city has been bombed. and or destroyed. And so they are starting over, and the U.S. is just cranking, right? We've just, our war production, our war machine, and all that stuff has happened. And so there really isn't a pause for us. And it's really during this period of time, a lot of things are being bought from Europe. We're supplying a lot of things to Europe. And so for the next 15, 20 years, it is a boom time in America, which leads to a lot of building and then a lot of growth, commercial, consumerism. We'll talk all about that. Just show you what a plan book looked like in 41. It's there is modern design, okay, and you'll see modern design going back to the 20s. I mean, you could argue that arts and crafts period is a modern style, but in the pattern books and in the plan books, most of what you see is still traditional designs, and then you'll see occasionally this kind of modern thing thrown in there. Houses are smaller, okay? They're not as big. There is, and we'll get into that and we'll talk about that, but these are fairly small houses. We go into 45. We see a little car in a garage, okay, attached to the house, kind of a new thing that's going on. It's still traditional designs with a kind of a plopped on garage to the side of the house. Design still fairly traditional, right? By 1950, you see a lot more of this kind of stuff, the mid-century modern, that sleek modern design, the glass with the windows that go horizontal. High windows is part of that style. It was a privacy window is what it was called. But there's also in these same plan books where you see mid-century things. And of course it's called mid-century because it happens in the middle of the century, in the 1950s and 60s. Thought to stop around 69. Again, very popular design plan. The house wasn't very big. You see a mix of these different house styles going on here. And the garage, one car typically being plopped on side the house. In the builder magazines at the time, this is 43 and 44, okay? War market issue, okay? Look at this one, how to build with what you can get. What they're talking about is there are rations in building, okay? You couldn't get copper, you couldn't get a lot of materials, and so one of the reasons houses get cheaper and smaller is because you can't build big houses. How to keep busy in wartime. Isn't that fascinating, right? Builders, and we'll talk about architects, are dying for work. Probably architects, we'll talk about architects and where their role is in another talk, but I mean, imagine being a designer in 43 when, first of all, very few houses are being built. No one needs an architect, right? And so they're looking for work, they're looking for things, and so, but builders are too. There's a whole, strategy that these builder magazines are pushing and shoving about, how to work during this time. How to get an early start on building for G.I. Joe. This is 43, I think, or 44. Even before the war ends, you'll start to see them pushing to, okay, when this war ends, what are we going to build? I think this modern building tomorrow is one about what happens after this is over. And I think in 43, I don't even think we thought we could beat the Germans by that time, right? And so, it's not till 44 that we start getting hopeful about that stuff. And even as early as 43, prefabrication, okay? They are interested in building faster and cheaper, okay? They are interested in this prefab idea that shows up in the 40s that ends up with mobile homes in the 60s and 70s, right? This idea of prefabbing what we're building and things like that, and we'll see this theme and this idea of building better. The housing crisis, okay? So after World War I, what happened to American economy is that there was mass unemployment. And so they were afraid as they're planning in 42, 43, 44 for unemployment. But what actually happened was that there was a housing crisis because the war ends in 45, 9 million vets come home. And we are not ready for these things. Here's an ad in the Roger Young Village made out of Quonset huts. There was They basically bought surplus Army Quonset huts, and on this base, I think there's 13,000 people applied for 1,500 little Quonset huts. I mean, people were living in railroad cars, people were doubling up with family. Here's some ads that are in the paper that this guy in '89 found. No sympathy or charity wanted, just a home, whatever you have to offer. We aren't perfect, just normal people. Vet, wife, child, won't you please call us? Pages and pages of these things of people looking for a place to live. Vets coming home, they get married, they start having kids. You've heard of the baby boom. That's when it starts, right during this time as we're going forward. So, 1926, okay, 26, okay. We've been cruising along since 1893 as they've been tracking housing starts. Now, today, housing starts, if the economy is healthy, is about 1 million housing starts, okay? They didn't get close to that. Well, they got close to that in 26. They got to 900,000. And then you see what happens in 33, 99,000. Started to get a little bit of a peak right there, got over 500,000. War happens, it drops right back down again. So this 20-year period of time, starting in 26, 41, that was a big year, 706,000. But unemployment's at 18%, right? We haven't been building houses for 20 years. So from 1926 to 1946, when the war ends, there's, what we should have been building is about 18 million homes. Instead, there was about 6.5 million in that time. So the number of houses just weren't there for all the people that were coming back. And realize that home ownership in the 40s was 44%. Do you know anybody know what it is today? About 64%, right? So 65, 66, I think it got as high as 67. So in this time period, home ownership was low and there was a dearth of houses, which is the reason why I had a housing crisis. The government has a plan. They get this guy, what's his name, Wyatt? The WWII program. So the war ends, everybody knows there's the housing crisis. The government says, we're going to appoint a senator to do the WWII program to start building. And here you see a hint at William Levitt when he's talked about how he built in spite of the WWII program. Now the WWII program meant there was rent control. A lot of houses being built at that time by Levitt were for the rental market. And so they had a rent control system in place. They had the size of house you could build. And what Levitt is basically doing in 46 is saying, we've been building 1,000 houses despite the WWII program. So the government got in there. He lasted, Truman appointed him. He lasted about a year and got pushed out of the way. So the WWII program was not a very long-lasting program, and they kind of got out of the way and let builders build. Now, there's a bunch of great books. They're not all Amazon books, or I would put them in a description in the link. But this is probably the most important book that was written in 44, okay? The 20th Century Fund. Basically, it was a government research fund that asked the question, the government basically did a study, why can't we build houses like we build cars? Cars are in mass production, they're beautiful, they work well, why can't we build houses like that? So what they did was they did this study and they found out 4 things. Home builders are regionally local, meaning that the guy works in Fort Worth, he doesn't work in Dallas, doesn't travel very far. That guy typically builds 1 to 4 houses a year, not building hundreds of houses. He's undercapitalized. He doesn't need money, but he doesn't have a line of capital at the bank. He isn't overextended, right? He's a responsible builder. And they're saying that that's bad. This is the worst part. Home builders craft homes instead of building them with a production mindset. Yikes! Yikes! That's the problem. We're crafting houses instead of building them boom, 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 okay? So you can see where I'm going with this, right? The tragedy of home building. And so, I got this picture because this is a 1920s catalog. This very romantic vision of home, this very romantic coming with the family and everything else. That's we're not building houses that way anymore. We are building houses fast and cheap as we can. One of the things that came out, this is the 1950s article, but there was all kinds of obstacles to building for Levitt and for others that they kind of hadn't thought of. Most of the codes were written in the 20s, okay? We're now in 40s and late 40s. This article is written in the 50s, and they're saying, look, if you want us to build a house like they're building cars, this is what our car would look like, because you're not allowing us to build the proper way, right? We've got new things here, we've got an old thing here, and there was examples of these problems with housing. They were talking about the plumbing code, that they weren't unified, that today we have an international building code for this exact reason, that you have a plumber code that doesn't apply to the building code, and they're not able to build and do things. They couldn't use plywood initially because plywood wasn't a tested product. And so they had to sheathe the houses with wood sheathing. They wanted to do it with plywood. They couldn't because it wasn't allowed. All these examples of things that were keeping them from building, but you're seeing what the industry's wrestling with. They're wrestling with, get out of our way and let us build fast as possible. Now, there are problems with this, and I'll get to at the end, but this is what the industry was struggling with as we're talking about this time. William Levitt, the wonderful Mr. Levitt. William Levitt was a builder. He was America's biggest builder. He was the D.R. Horton of his age. He was a masterful salesman. He was charismatic. He was smart. He was cheap. They are talking about building to achieve maximum production and speed. They're talking about building 350 houses every 20 days, right? So they're building, what was that, 18 houses a day? They are cranking them out, right, a day. So in 1946, 47, no one's built like this before, okay? No one's done this stuff. And Levitt is cranking and building. One other thing happens that allows Levitt to do that, and that is the government financing and the government involvement. Basically, in 1935, under Roosevelt, they started the Federal Housing Administration. And what that did was that guaranteed a loan, okay? So the reason we have 30-year mortgages today is because of the FHA, okay? Before then, you would have 3 to 5 year loans. Now imagine paying your house off in 3 to 5 years. I wouldn't own a house, right? I wouldn't be in a house. And so what happens when the FHA basically goes in and says, we're going to guarantee the house for 30 years, they're guaranteeing the quality, they're guaranteeing that it will last that long. They're basically funding it, okay? And then in 44 with the GI Bill, basically it allowed GIs to buy a house with no money down. And so it basically made it even more affordable, right? And so home ownership, you see, went from 44 to 62 in about a 15-year period, 20-year period, because all of a sudden houses were affordable. All of a sudden houses could be paid. And what that did for Levitt, right, this isn't a Levitt picture, but there's pictures of people lining up to buy houses in 46, 47, 48. Thousands of people. Levitt has examples of 1,500 signed contracts in one day. And he would have, 5 salesmen in one row. He would have, 5 the VA people in the next row and 5 FHA people in the next row, approving, stamping, locking them in, getting them in, going. Imagine selling 1,500 houses in one weekend. But that's because the government got behind it and allowed Levitt to do it. What that allowed Levitt to do was basically have the government pay for all the speculation. There was no production builders before 1945 because no one knew how to do it. Imagine all the money you would have to put up, okay, until someone could buy that house in order for them to buy it. The math didn't work. And all of a sudden the math works, and Levitt is smart enough that he takes advantage and just rocks and rolls. He was an old-time builder. This is his dad in the middle, his brother who was the architect, and William Levitt here. They were custom home builders. They were building Tudor revival houses in New York, right? If you can imagine that. And for a wealthy client. Now the story is that his family won a contract for, a government contract for Army-based housing in Norfolk, Virginia. And a lot of people did that, okay? A lot of people during the war found jobs in the government building housing. Well, what kind of house was that? That wasn't a Tudor revival with a basement. What he learned to do is basically to build barracks, okay? That meant they were slab foundations. That meant they were very small. They were the minimal, simplest houses, and they cranked them out. We don't know. He never says in his writings that I learned so much from doing that. It's just speculation that it was just, he learned so much from doing that. He starts Levittown, which turns into a 17,000 house development, 80,000 citizens, okay, in that one development. No builder had ever built that many houses in one development, and he did it again in Philadelphia, another 17 did it again in New Jersey. Just no one had done that. Pregnant pause. It was crazy, and we'll get back to this when we talk about what happened in suburbia and what he was creating, but it was a stunning achievement, right? He's on the cover of Time in 1950. I got a reprint of that thing right in that office, and there's another one on DIY. Okay, you wonder where DIY starts? DIY starts in this period of time. Time magazine has the cover of a guy on his house, doing all these power tools and everything. DIY starts in this period of time. That's Levittown. No fences. Okay, the houses were very small, 600 and 800 square feet, no basement. They look like Monopoly houses, don't they? He owned all the money. That's what he did on Monopoly. He broke the housing down into 26 steps, okay? That, he would have, first of all, everything was systemized. There was only 4 house styles, okay? And so he had, and the way he created, I don't know if it shows it in that picture, but he would orient the houses differently on the block. I guess this is too early because he starts doing it later with the ranches, where he would orient and flip the carports and things like that on these houses so that it didn't look monotonous, but it was. And so he was playing around with tricks and doing things like that, but he broke the house down into 26 steps. Typically what happened in a large development is, a builder buys 15 of the 100 lots, and then he kind of spreads them out around there. He picks the best lots. Lev was like, no, we're not doing that. Slab, 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 slab. Lumber shows up, pre-cut lumber, housing, plumbing trees drop in. Everything was made off-site. If it was possible to make it off-site, he was making it off-site. He got so vertically integrated, okay, that he owned the nail factory, okay? He bought lumber in California, bought the lumber mill, and ran his own lumber, brought it to the job site, right? And then when it got to his mill, everything was pre-cut, wrapped into a package, sent out to the job. Here's your studs. Everything was 8-foot studs, so the framers would get there, the wall framers, because they weren't the same as the roof framers, and they would get there and they would put that package together. So these houses went up in this system, and at this time, okay, there was union carpenters, okay, and union carpenters typically would do all the carpentry, do the framing, do the sheathing, do the roof, do the cabinets, do all that stuff. He said, no, we're not doing that. So he bypassed that as part of his 26 steps. I mean, one of the steps was painting, and there's guys with red paint, and guys with blue paint that would just, go around painting. There was one step was for a guy to go in and just bolt the washing machine down to the floor. I mean, it was an incredible system of organization of how he put everything together. He is not using some materials. For instance, he goes to drywall. There's no plaster in the walls. There's no wood floors. Wood floors were hard to get. They were using asphalt floors, and he got plywood sheathing approved. He even went to the township to get, there was a code that you couldn't have basements, and he got around that by having all the GIs show up and say, we want basements, and of course, they're not going to vote against GIs. Anyway, it was an amazing thing that he was doing. an incredible operation. These are his lumber yards, the guys fitting things together. He had a system for bolting these roof systems together. So when there was an idea like that, it got completely redone. This is the way packages would there's all the lumber pre-cut, there's the stairs, there's the fence. I mean, just everything was brought to the job site, assembled, right? So his deal was, I'm not a Henry, they call him the Henry Ford of home building, but he was not doing, his thing was like, yeah, I am doing that, but instead of the assembly line of the car moving through, the workers are going down through each house and working on that. One of the first guys to do modular windows where they're building off site. Typically, you built the frame and then a glazer and a glazer union came in and put the glass in. They were already all pre-built. He was one of the first ones to do heated floors. So very ingenious, okay? As he goes into the later 40s and 50s, he begins to offer the ranch. The ranch style, that name was very popular. Before, as you saw, those were all little cape houses. And so he was like, no, the capes are no longer popular. Where's that ranch one that had the tilted thing? And so he's getting into the design of these things. He got picture windows looking out the back. This was 79, that was 11,000. One of his things is, I can build a house for $2,000 cheaper than the next guy and still make $1,000. Is what his brag was. And he goes, I'm not a builder, I'm a manufacturer, right? He had anyway, keep going on and on. These are what some of the houses look like, right? This is what it looked like on the outside. There's some really great books on Levittown that you get to see some of these pictures. There's that asphalt tile floor. Notice, we'll build you this today. It'll only be $200,000. No moldings, right? No moldings in this house. How simple they are. This outdoor living area was a big thing. But those houses are pretty cool. In kind of a retro way, right? But very simple, okay? And then we'll get into the mid-century design and talk about why it looked this way, and some of the philosophical things that were going on. But Levitt had all kinds of critics. Lewis Mumford was one of his critics. Mumford was a sociologist and writer and thinker, and he was like, when Levitt started building this, he was just, these are the future slums of America. Just tons of criticism. There was a racism thing. I'm not even going to get into that. They didn't allow blacks for a time. But in the 60s, this team won the Little League World Series. You can see that this is at the Shop-O-Rama. They had an elephant taking kids around. Those kids look pretty happy. And what happened was, they did a study about 10 years after Levitt was built, kind of let's go look at all the problems. And all they found was just incredible. I love my house. I love Levittown. I love, everything about it. When William Levitt drove through the things, he was a hero. I mean, he was like, oh my gosh, it's William Levitt, which is fascinating. And you go, well, why? What was going on? Let me see. And basically, you have the rise of suburbia, right? You have, if you think about in 1926 to 1946, if you're, have anybody watched Mr. Blanding's Build His Dream House? Anybody watched that? You remember the apartment he was in before he moved out to the city, okay? It was kind of a New York apartment or a Philadelphia apartment. And a lot of people lived like that. And you'll see in some of the builders magazines, if you look at them, one of the work opportunities they talk about was repairing apartments and repairing and do this work. But not only were we not building from 26 to 46, we weren't repairing. And so there was people living in, apartments in New York. You shared a bathroom with another family. You didn't have any, amenities, and you were paying $80 to $90 a month. Levitt was offering those houses, right, with a yard, with neighbors for $50 a month, and it came with a washer and dryer, right? And so they were like, "Are you kidding? This is a no-brainer." So people, you wonder why, the housing ownership went from 40 to 60. is basically, the bottom line is he built an inexpensive house that allowed a lot more people to kind of buy into the American dream of owning their own house. And so the urban flight, okay, to suburbia, okay, is a two-edged sword, right? These people were living much better, okay? They owned their own house. One of the proofs of that Levitt was so successful was they go back 10 years later and people had added on. They put a garage, they finished out their attic, they did an addition. People were pouring money into their houses because they loved them, right? So it was an interesting deal because he had a great deal of criticism, but the fact is he really, I don't want to say invented, but basically, brought together a wonderful way of life that people, grew up and still remember. They go back to Levittown today and they're saying that people, are the second generation living in their parents' house, that they just don't want to leave. They just have so many great memories and so many friends. So it's a fascinating issue, okay? Because today we complain about sprawl, right? This was sprawl, okay? This was early sprawl. And, if you ask the people that own Levittown, they're not complaining about the sprawl, right? They're looking at it going, I've got my own house, I've got my own deal. He created these neighborhoods where, you didn't walk across a busy street to get to school. There were shopping malls. There was things that were all locally and centrally located. There was, I think, 9 schools. Levitt was huge into baseball. There was baseball diamonds everywhere. There was churches. He created communities. And so on the building side, it drives me nuts because he killed craftsmanship, right? And on the social side, he created homes for people. So anyway, I'm really conflicted. Okay, any questions about Levitt or Levittown or any of that? Okay. Yes.
So what was the average annual income compared to the cost of a home? So what you made per day compared to...
Well, these houses were, I don't have that figure exactly. They had, in the early years, there were $8,000 houses. Later in the 50s, he was like $11,000 and $12,000. So I don't have the answer. Before I keep blabbing, I don't have the answer. I can look it up. I don't know if the same percentages are true back then. Yeah.
Did these houses appreciate? A lot of times it's, you buy your first house and then hopefully it's worth more to keep it and then you jump up to the next size. I mean, did they?
No, they did appreciate. And so the question was, did the houses appreciate? And that was, I think they when they did the study 10 years later and kind of came back, they were surprised that they had appreciated. They were surprised that people had poured more money into the house. They had increased the value of it with the work they put into it. And so, the quick answer is yes. The long answer is yes too. Okay.
Oh, I got a question. Was there any downtime for it? Because you have the life cycle of neighborhoods. We have a contingent here today from Wedgwood.
Oh yeah.
Wedgwood.
Welcome Wedgwood.
Wedgwood it was like the Levittown of Fort Worth, in 1956. It went like that, but now it's coming back up again. Levittown never had any sort of...
That's interesting. I don't have the answer to that question either. He was asking whether Levittown ever had a dip. I don't know. I'd have to look. I mean, certainly from the literature that's available online, they don't talk about that because that would be a normal real estate cycle that everything went down. It wasn't just Levittown. So, but certainly they talk about Levitt love and,
You mentioned the family, like multi-generations lived there. That probably helped because I think Wedgwood went through a real rental phase.
interesting. Are you Kip?
I am.
Okay. You're the historian. If you have anything to add, you're welcome to chime in. So thank you for coming. There's a whole Wedgwood contingent here, and so Wedgwood's an area of Fort Worth. We'll talk about a little bit of Fort Worth. Fort Worth as defense town. So Lockheed Martin had a big plant here. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But there were a number of neighborhoods built up that had country clubs, shopping malls, exactly like Wedgwood did. Ridgely's another one. I live in a 1960s house, and so I have the same thing.
Well, Wedgwood is going to be the largest national registered district in Texas, which means it will be the largest national registered historic district in the world.
That's sweet.
Because everything's bigger in Texas.
Yes.
Do you ever integrate non-residential structures or projects into his subdivision design?
Being like shopping malls and churches and things, he did. Yeah, he did a lot. That shop-orama picture I was showing was a part of his plan. It's interesting, 46, 47, it was all rent houses. And then he sees the demand changing. He changes over to, starts building ranches, starts building bigger, and really develops his neighborhood at that time and kind of installs some of those. It appears, from my reading, that it was a little bit of seat of the pants. He was building so fast and so many things that it was kind of like, why do we do that? Wait a minute, why do we do that? And so Philadelphia was the second one. He started buying up land for that, and then to go into Philadelphia. I think he was a more well-oiled machine by the time he got to Philadelphia than New York. Okay, mid-century. So Levittown, it moves into this mid-century era, and we're going to talk about this mid-century design. Everybody know this iconic photo? No? Y'all recognize that? So this is a Stahl House, okay, in Los Angeles. Julia Schulman was the photograph. I'll show you another picture of that. But mid-century is a movement. It's not just mid-century houses. You have mid-century furniture, the Danish modern furniture. Hans Wegner, the guy I love, that I got his chair. It's not his chair, one of his design. So we're talking about a whole movement of pottery, art, furniture, houses. It's all part of that same kind of movement. If you just look at the house style, you want to recognize the house styles. Certainly the low pitch roof or flat roofs. This open floor plan goes along with that informal, right? This was an informal lifestyle. This is an informal way of thinking and living. Minimalism, okay? You don't have carved ornate moldings in this era. You don't have moldings. There's minimal design. Large picture windows. I don't know if you've heard my talk about glass, but in the 1940s they developed float glass, which allows huge sheets of glass that weren't available before. So one reason large picture windows show up in ranch style houses is because we could. We knew how to bake big pieces of glass, and that outside inside living happens a lot in this period. Inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, we'll talk about that in a sec. And the ranch style of houses, the one-story low ranch style houses that are outdoor inside living that happen between Texas and California. But it's a very, I guess, informal. Now, anybody recognize this house? This is a Usonian house. Frank Lloyd Wright, 1939. Notice, low pitch roof, open floor plan, informal, minimalism, large picture windows, modular construction. Okay, you talk about, what influenced that? That influenced that, right? So if you go back to our arts and crafts talk, we talk about the Roby house, that was an open floor plan. That was a low pitched roof. So one reason Frank Lloyd Wright is kind of this, oh my gosh, Frank Lloyd Wright, if you're an architect, is because he was so inventive and so ahead of his time and so doing things that were cutting edge and really cool. There's also...
When you use the term modular construction, in that context, I think of modular as sort of built off-site, brought in. How are you using
So you see in some of his houses, he'll have grids on the floor that are 4x4. And so he'll have and of course, sheet of plywood is 4x8. He'll have windows that are 4x8, and so he'll have a modular size that then ties in with the brick, the plywood, the everything that would go along with it follows into this modular design. If you look at his floor plans, he'll have this geometric shape or whatever that will then tie everything together and pull everything together. So You know, if you get into modular brick and you get into other things like that, it's all based on a module, a size that you can build from. Now, remember, a lot of this, I'll come right back to you, is everybody is focused on building fast and cheap and production, okay? Even the design side, okay? So I'm going to show you some houses in the called the case study houses that are all about, you know, the architects magazines put on the case study house. I'll show you in a sec. The Museum of Modern Art did a study on, you know, how we can make houses affordable and cheaper, okay? So it wasn't just builders fighting for that thing. It was manufacturers, it was architects, it was everybody working towards, you know, like they're making houses like cars, producing them faster and better. Yeah.
What do you mean by open floor plan? Because I know nowadays.
I'll show you. Yeah, open floor plan. The question is, what do you mean by open floor plan? The kitchen to the living room. If you think of a 1920s house, okay, the kitchen's compartmentalized way off to the back side. You have very formal entries into new spaces. You know, these houses, there's almost no walls, right? There's dividers, maybe the fireplace, or maybe, you know, if we go back to those Levitt things, see that divider right there, right? That's an open floor plan where the kitchen opens to the dining room. It's not, and this room opens to the living room. So, you know, if you think about it philosophically or sociologically, there are no servants now. There's no, they're going to serve me in this area. It's a very informal, open plan. Modernism, too, is not just about, it doesn't get invented in 1950, right? Modernism is happening way back. And we go to, you know, Art Deco conference was 1926, International Style and Design, there was the Museum of Modern Arts thing in 22. The Bauhaus, obviously, that was Walter Gropius. This is his house in 1938 in Massachusetts when he went to Harvard. So modernism is happening, and there isn't this stark difference between modern and traditional at that time. They kind of weave together. Certainly that is an open floor plan. The Farnsworth House meets Vanderohe. He's German. He was at the Bauhaus for a little bit of a while. He went to ITT in Chicago and built this house almost as an experimental deal, but a lot of the ideals of this mid-century modern, flat roof, big open panes of glass, informal living plan, right? Outdoor and inside living together. So, you know, you're seeing all of those things happen. This is that case study house I was telling you about. And basically, Art and Architecture magazine sponsored what was called a case study. This was that iconic picture where those two ladies were sitting right there. And the case study was an attempt from this magazine to get architects to come up with unique designs that could be reproducible. Do I have that quote there? The house must be capable of duplication and in no sense be an individual performance. Can you believe an architect magazine said that to architects? That's crazy to me, in no sense to be an individual performance. I don't know whether that means it's not reproducible or not duplicable, or it means get your ego out of it. This isn't a, you know, certainly Starchitects were just starting to happen in this period. Certainly Frank Lloyd Wright was, but but that is a fascinating attempt, and it gives you an insight into what was going on in the design community for coming up with these houses. So this was, the program doesn't work in the research I was reading because a lot of these guys want to use steel fabrication, and a lot of those things weren't adoptable by builders who wanted to build with, you know, with bricks and sticks. And so the program, you know, in the literature I was reading, basically didn't work, didn't help, you know, the industry develop a duplicatable house that could be mass produced. But here's an example of that. Richard Neutra, this is, you know, one of the complaints about architects of this period was they were building things that were for the elite. This would be an example. They were expensive, they couldn't be reproduced, but there were beautiful houses. I think that's a beautiful house. that were being built at this time, but they were kind of one-offs, and they weren't, meant for the masses. Joseph Eichler, anybody heard of Eichler? So he was the guy who basically, did the best job of bringing modern design to the masses. I think I can say that. It's interesting, when I was reading about him, he had a second career. He was an accountant for a family business, and he actually went and lived in a Frank Lloyd Wright Usonian house, the Bazet house, and fell in love with the design. And he said, this is the way we should be living. This is the kind of house that I would want to build. And so very slowly he starts building a house and then kind of checking it out. And then he built 2 houses and then by the time he built the 4th or 5th house, he goes and finds the best architects he can find to start building houses for the masses. This book is really good. It's called Eichler, Modernism Rebuilds the American Dream.
Did he build in California? You see
Yeah.
a lot of California.
Yeah, and look, this style and this other house, right? Where do you think that is? That's not in Minnesota. This style works. Yeah, it's in Palm Springs. Does it say that? But that California thing, that works, where the median temperature is 70 degrees or 75, and, they rarely get much colder than that. These were oftentimes heated with radiant heat floors. But this style doesn't work all over the place. And it's interesting that Eichler had a tough time starting and building. One of the comments that one person makes is that not sure Eichler could have done it if there hadn't been such high demand. And that some people were buying their houses. Ned, the son who got into the business, was saying he had talked to people that didn't like the exterior, but they liked the feel of the interior, and they said, oh, well, we'll just go ahead and buy it. So it was a interesting thing and comment about modernism, that modern houses just aren't that popular. And so I think it's cool to say I love modern housing, but the fact is most people don't and have a hard time buying it. But he built over 11,000 houses. I mean, he built a lot of houses. Yeah.
All look alike.
They do all look alike.
So is that actual lumber or is that a glue lamp?
It's actual lumber. No glue lamps at that time. At least the ones he was building at were actual lumber. Remember, you still had big trees back then. You had big fir trees that they were building with. You said they all look alike, okay? But that's kind of what the vision was, right? That's kind of what the industry wanted. They wanted something that was duplicatable, right? They wanted something that looked alike. I wouldn't say they're cookie cutter as much as Levitt's were, but you're right. They did build a lot that were similar.
And the rooms are small.
Well, all houses of that period, the rooms are small, the smaller houses.
Examples of that last house are on here, like in Arlington Heights or anything. It looks kind of.
I suspect, I mean, I don't know about that exact one, but well, I got some pictures that when just driving around looking at some stuff that I think is more typical, right? These are some typical things you see, kind of these concrete screens, this big open plans, flat roof. There's this atrium design that he was really, that A. Quincy Jones and stuff had come up with. So, mid-century. These are some of the interiors. Look how open that is, right? Kitchen. I mean, she looks like she's going to the ball. She doesn't, she's not cooking.
That's Mrs. Cleaver.
That's Mrs. Cleaver. Eichler had a whole marketing department that most of his pictures from the marketing department were all staged. And, we're all, this idyllic lifestyle with parties and everything else that they did. He was a masterful marketer.
Is that ceiling corrugated?
It is. And there was a lot of experimental. Yeah. There's a lot of experimental materials that were being used at that time. Eichler, it said, tried steel for a time but couldn't get it to work. So this was one of the ones that he had tried. Any question about design or architecture in this period?
You know, there's no moldings with any details. I mean, it's
We're going to talk about that.
okay.
Okay, so the housing boom, 1950 to 1969. Look what happens. What is that? 47, 49. Is that right? 43, 45, 47, 49. Yeah. Look what happens, okay? We'd never gotten over 1 million, and they got over 2 million in 73, but almost to 2 million in 53, 55, right? Explosion, right? That all of a sudden we are building at a different level, at a different speed, and a different pace. And we're going to see when I show you some of those magazines how American Builder as a magazine completely changes its focus from what it did do to what it does now, or what it did later. This I'm showing, okay, family-sized bomb shelter. So this was the ad. This was in a 1950s parade of homes in Houston, Texas. It was in Southwest Houston. The first H-bomb shelter ever erected in a speculative house is featured in this home at 5102 Jackwood Drive, which is now demolished. I went and looked at it on Google Earth. It's not there. While National Civilian Defense Chief talks about the mass evacuation of cities, something is actually being done in Houston and the parade of homes. Called the Paracap Shelter, it is a parabolic roof with every outside piece curved to absorb and resist shock and blast. The shelter is entered from the stairway, can be used. The shelter has an emergency exit through the round tunnel cap, which has a circular eyepiece in the tunnel cap for observation. A separate air intake through the filter, periscope that changes air every 15 minutes. It will accommodate up to 10 persons comfortably for a week or more. Mr. Appella said the shelter will withstand pressure exerted by the heaviest known H-bomb in an area of half a mile from the blast center. Now, I read that because I nearly started the whole talk with that, because I feel like the war changed everything, right? It changed how we live, how we think, how, priorities. It was an amazing change in frame of mind that happened after World War II. And the fact that they would so flippantly advertise a H-bomb shelter is just crazy to me. But I remember, I was born in '65. I remember families having bomb shelters, and so, it was a thing. So anyway, I thought that was crazy. So what was being built at this time? I was surprised. This is 1950. This was the Parade of Home advertisement. I didn't see a traditional house in this whole catalog thing, and there was about 18 houses in there. Most of them are all modern. They don't really talk about the design so much as the amenities, the living room, the patio, the appliances, and the air conditioning. But you see, the split level. We don't have a lot of split levels in Fort Worth. There are some, but certainly this modern design, Home of Tomorrow, was a famous book that was written, that talked about what the house should look like and everything else. This is kind of a parade of homes in 1950. Building really changes, and you'll see that, and I'll talk about these things, but it's all about speed and production, okay? It's all about, and you're going to see as we look through these products and projects that are going on, how everybody was focused on that. And there was craft here, and they went like this, and they go, come on, let's go. And they started building fast and cheap. Talked about the prefabrication. Prefab and modernism, I told you that in that case study house, it was all about something that could be reproducible. This is an example of everybody trying to get in on that, everybody trying to solve that problem. How can we build houses cheaper and faster? How can we make home ownership more available to everybody else? So the whole prefab and the modernism work together. I had to put that in there. So there is, even for mobile houses, this kind of prefabricated porch. But this was 1958. This could be your house. It could be you tomorrow. And inside, they basically show a whole bathroom that's been put together, and then you bring it to the job site like this. They had pictures of, you know, kind of the bathroom being finished, and they're still building. They haven't put in the roof on this thing.
Is that wallpaper?
It's got to be a tile board. It's got to be a tile board, right? I hope. The prefab and stuff influences a lot of the design. So we talked about modularization, but plywood was a great tool that they could set these things off center, drop their plywood down, and know that they had this exact fit. Think about what was used before, sheathing. Okay, what were you doing? Well, you'd have to lay the board on there. You'd have to cut each one to line up in the center. You'd have to lay your next one out. This is fast, baby. Come on, let's throw it up there and get going. It's a much cheaper way and faster way to build. Same thing with concrete blocks. There is a whole host of new products. One of the articles I was reading talked about how an architect's library in 1943 would have a suites catalog, 1 volume. By 1950, there was like 8 volumes of the suites catalog. The number of products that had been invented during the war, okay, invented for speed and production. Plywood's one of them. Plywood invented for the war. They were building boats out of it. They're doing all kinds of crazy stuff with plywood. And the builders are complaining that the code doesn't allow them to use plywood, right? So in some areas they had to use sheathing. So anyway, there's this struggle going on there. Hollow core doors happened in this period. The big picture windows, Formica countertop, they call it plastic laminate, and certainly aluminum windows, which we were talking about when we did our drive around, are a problem because the new plastic and vinyl windows that go into these houses look terrible. So we got to solve that one. So plywood, the U.S. Plywood Association markets their plywood as weldwood. So if you've ever been to a lumber yard and seen weldwood, that's what's going on, okay? But you see how they're trying to use this. See this guy? He's covering over some wallpaper there, and it's kind of a do-it-yourself. This is the early DIY. I mean, that's certainly a homeowner doing that with his very proud wife. But plywood cabinets, if you've ever gone in an old house after 1940, you start seeing plywood cabinets as opposed to stile and rail cabinets. That's why. And plywood is interesting. Here's a comic book. This is like 50-something. But look what they're doing. Look at the way they're marketing plywood, okay? They're basically explaining its history, that used in Egypt. Never heard that before. How it was used, right? And then how it's made, right? Look at this. The amazing properties, its strength, big panels, puncture proof, split proof, low cost, tested in quality, science, easy to use. And then look at this. 1,000 uses for plywood, right? There's a guy building a boat, train cars. So they are educating the public. I remember reading Sam Malouf. He's a furniture maker, makes these beautiful rockers. And his early job was working for the Army or somebody, showing people projects that they could use to build plywood things, okay? So plywood was really pushing their product onto the market. They'd have a guy like Sam Malouf building cabinets so that homeowners could look at it and go, you know what, I could build a cabinet with plywood. I don't have to use these fancy woods. I could just buy plywood. So this is when plywood starts happening, is the point here, and really mass used here after this time. 450, that's 56, plywood today, hardwood plywood, workbook, right? So they're pushing it through the builder magazines. They're really saying, hey, you really need to use this product. You need to try it. Here's some great ways. Here's time-saving ways, labor-saving ways, cost-saving ways, all about plywood. Of course, the idea books. Concrete was another thing, and certainly concrete blocks, concrete screens we've looked at. One thing that was amazing to me, this was the cover of the catalog, and then it opened up showing all these different deals. I think this was 50-something, 54. Marcel Brewer, right? And so they've got these star architects, doing their design. So they would come up with a design on a project. U.S. Concrete would get behind it, basically patent it for them. There's A. Quincy Jones, our guy with the Eichler guy who worked with Eichler. Both those guys worked with Eichler. And so they came up with these designs. They would have been licensed and then used. So again, concretes and concrete blocks, certainly something very important in this period, was endorsed by people like that. Picture windows, and certainly the building materials and windows things. It's interesting because I've got a lot of millwork catalogs. And so if you looked at one in 42 and then you looked at one in 52, 90% of it was the same. But I had to look to try to find these big picture windows. And you had all the style and rail doors, and then they had the hollow core doors. Same cost, which was amazing to me, as a style and rail door, but I know from being in 1950s houses that the hollow core door was almost used universally. So it's very interesting. This high window, right, for privacy that you see in a lot of mid-century houses was popular, but these bigger all light windows, and the bigger the pane, the better. They're showing all these different sizes, but I'm showing the horizontal ones because those are the ones that show up most. The design goes from vertical to horizontal. So you got these houses that are long and low slung out. And so if you've got windows with these horizontal panes, don't throw them away, please. Wood and aluminum. It comes in both. This was, I think this is wood. Tough. Live with it. Big picture windows like this are very important, very popular in that style. And then I just had to do this. Have you seen these? Whose idea was this? I think it says it's energy efficient too, somewhere. Kip, do you have something to say?
Horseshack has a question.
Yeah.
Now, my wife is insisting that we rip out the aluminum windows in our house, in our ranch style house. Now, I want to ask you about energy efficiency, because that's what you're talking about. I read someplace that most of the heat goes out through the roof. It doesn't go out through the windows.
Alice, would you like to?
Someone please
So
tell me what the truth is.
the question.
Because Amy's like, no, that is ridiculous because all the heat goes out through the aluminum windows.
That is 100% false. Okay.
What is false?
That they go out the windows.
Yes, they go out through the roof.
Yeah.
75% of the heat goes out.
More
through
than
the
that.
roof,
So yeah, we just did a we just.
right? I need your help on this.
Yeah. Here. Do I need to write it down?
Like, they've got to go.
So energy efficiency, huge deal. That's a whole nother talk. But you can do it a number of different ways. Okay. I can try to do this fast. If you look at your energy bill, only about 30 or 40% goes to heating and cooling. There's refrigeration, there's TVs, there's all the other things that you spend money on. Only about 30 to 40% is heating and cooling, first. Second, only about 10% of your energy loss goes out windows. 10%. Okay? So there's no way that you're going to replace the windows and then see a savings on your energy bill. They say that between 40 and 120 years, depending on your house, to see an energy savings on your windows. Now, that would assume that your new windows would last that long, which they won't. And so it is ludicrous, okay? Ludicrous. There, I said it. That do you think you can save energy by changing your windows?
Okay, you've helped me a lot. Now, one last question. Storm windows. I want to rip out all the storm windows that the Colonel put in the house like in the 1970s. Do storm windows help with energy conservation very much?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, they will help. They protect your window. What are you saying? Yeah. So I have a YouTube video on window restoration, and you can go. You can sit her down in front of it and make her watch it. Yeah. So storm windows do help. Thank you, Alice, for keeping us going. Cracking the whip back there. Anyway, this is funny to me that it was. I don't know where they said it. There's something about it's energy efficient in there somewhere. Draft control. That could be the worst idea for a window ever, right? That the glass sitting on it. Oh, it's gonna be anyway. Drives me crazy. The other thing that happens is moldings begin to shrink. We're talking about moldings even being there. the largest molding the largest casing is 3.5 inches. Now, if you had a 3.5 inch casing in the Victorian period, they laugh at you, right? Moldings can get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until almost they disappear today, but all the moldings shrink in size. There's the hollow core door and the prices associated with it. These modern style doors start showing up after about 52. There's your clamshell molding, right? The most popular molding in this period. Very easy, very quick to put in. And then we get into the kind of the consumerism, because the other half of and another piece of, Levittown growing and thing is that there was people that these manufacturers were coming out with newfangled products. One of the big selling things with Levittown was a washer and dryer, right? Was that you had these modern amenities. So we get into this industrial machine after World War II. We're the only country that our factories aren't bombed. We're sending stuff over to Europe. We're sending stuff everywhere, and we are making everything. And so this new group of people, 20% of the Americans who are now actually able to own their houses, are filling it up with stuff. And these ads and these details and these, if you ever watched the show Mad Men, it's a classic, right, showing some of that cool stuff that they're selling, right? It's all about the sell, which is just so fascinating. Okay, sorry, I got carried away. All right, so this is the mid-century modern house. No, it's not. But look at the difference between this house, 1920s Park Hill, and, uh-oh. Huh. Hopefully that's just a glitch in the matrix. Material change. Talking about all those materials. Before World War II, wood floors and tile. After World War II, asphalt, linoleum, concrete sometimes. And this is kind of on that entry-level house, right? This is not higher-end houses would have nicer things. Wood sheathing or plaster goes to drywall. I talked about in one of my videos that drywall is invented in the 20s and 30s as a replacement for lath. Okay, well, it becomes the whole wall by the 40s and 50s. Tile countertops become plastic laminate. The starter house is about 1,400 square feet, goes down to about 800 square feet. Slab floors versus basements. Wood windows and wood doors versus aluminum windows, hollow core doors. Not only houses gotten smaller, but they've gotten cheaper. And we are, slowly walking away from craft, and we are, creating problems for myself, which I'm going to talk about at the end. I want to talk about garages real quick. Am I way over? So here's car ownership, okay? What is that, to the 1930s? We're just under 60%. You see what happens at World War II. And then by 60, right, we're up to almost 80%, going even into today. The garages is interesting because, as I said, and as I was showing earlier, a lot of these mid-century houses have the garage in the front of the house, okay? And there are critics who will complain about new developments calling snout-nose houses, that the garage is on the front, that you enter through the garage in the house, there's almost no front door. So this is the beginning of that. As the car gains dominance in our society, which also has problems, it happens. So garages in 1920, very cute, quaint, very small things, right? They begin to see designs like this in the 20s. And then, with upstairs living areas, certainly an architectural style, a part of it, but almost always separate, right, from the house. This is 1926, and different manufacturers have put out these different things. Overhead Door Company was around in the 1920s and 30s, really becomes into the dominance. Notice 1940, Tudor Revival House, right, these period revival houses. But look at that, that's how you open the door with that push button thing, that cool? And then 1950, right, the garage is attached to the part of the house, all these different cool designs that should still all be available today. But they were made from wood, style and rail things. This was an article in the 1950 American builder on garages. So this is the first one that I could find where they actually highlight garages. 1949, only 53% of houses had a garage. That was kind of interesting to me that the science, this was like an 8-page article talking about the turning radiuses and everything else that went into how to do their driveway so you didn't hit the back of it. All these different things that you would think they would have figured out by then, they didn't. We're not doing that. I thought I took that out of there. Okay, so how had building changed? American Builder, 1956. Look at these two covers of the magazines, right? Beauty, let's all build beautiful houses. This is, you know, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, you know. They are gonna just come after you, right? Building is a business. Design, management, construction, merchandising, right? This is focus. This is we're gonna build. We are men who build houses. Beauty, production, fast as we can. This could be your house. Beauty, production, right? This is the same magazine, right? That's about 20 years apart. Is that right? 30 years apart. That we have changed the way we're building. We've changed the way we think about building. So there are no large production builders before World War II. A large production builder, from the reading I've done, is 300 houses a year. These guys are building in the thousands, right? And they are everywhere. It's not, Levitt is the biggest and the most famous, okay, partly because he was such a great showman, but they're in Texas, California, they're everywhere, these production builders. Houses crafted one at a time, houses crafted as fast as possible, right? Speed is retarded, speed is rewarded. Traditional designs and materials, modern design, new materials, you know, unique designs applauded, cookie cutter designs expected, right? It has changed, people. It has changed. It is, you know, cataclysmic what's going on, what changes. And so, in closing, kind of whipped through that. Future warning, okay? This is my hint towards a future talk that we've got coming, because I said that this is when building starts getting messed up. This is the other part of that article where they showed the car, that funny car, where they said that this is all the problems. It says, look what we could do. This house would cost $1,000 less with modernized codes. These things are not always good, okay? Chimney, use a prefab chimney instead of a masonry chimney. So you wonder why houses today have those wood-sided things that go up where they're just covering the metal flue, is because they're not requiring masonry on chimneys. Roof reeving, replacing 5-inch ply with 3/8 ply. Can you imagine stepping on a 3/8-inch plywood roof between the rafter studs? That would scare me. Non-bearing walls, replace 2x4s with 2x3 studs. Basement slab, that's a good one. They're shrinking the size of the plywood. What was this one? Replace 5-inch plywood with a gypsum board. Joists on 24-inch centers. Anyway, builders get the sniff, you know, to get the scent of the prey, and they're going after it, right? They are like, you know, anyway, they're on it. And so these things that happen, reason our houses are getting ugly today is because builders are in charge of production. Builders are in charge of moving this thing. The architects have been pushed out of the way, and these guys are chasing speed and production. That's why your realtor says, you know, well, the price per square foot is da, 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 because it's all about price per square foot. It's all about trying to hit these numbers, and you end up with houses that are cheap. And then as far as design goes, this was from that, that's not Old English, okay? I'm just here to tell you. And you'll see designs and houses and things that are put together that you're just like, wait, what? What is that looking like? And they're calling it, oh, it's a modern Tudor. And you're like, that's not modern, and it's not Tudor. Anyway, we start to see a problem here. Okay, so lessons for, I'm overwhelmed by how much the war changed our design and our building and our focus during this time. It's amazing to me. We'll talk about it again in the 70s, which is the low point of American design. and the Vietnam War. There has to be a balance. We have to fight for a balance between great design and speed. And then we're going to talk about this too. We need beautiful things, okay? We as humans need things to be beautiful. And things can't be ugly or we don't take care of them. And so we'll talk more about that. All right, here's the quiz. What movie is that? You two can't answer. No, wait, does anybody know? What? No, go ahead and tell us. Yeah, this is Mr. Blanding builds his dream house. We are taking a shift next time, and we are going to talk about Hollywood and architecture. And so we're going to talk about Mr. Blandings. We're going to talk about great architecture. We're going to talk about why evil layers are oftentimes modern architecture. And we're going to talk about why the father of the bride lives in a very traditional house. And we're going to identify those houses and look at them. It's going to be a lot of fun. So,
Have you seen Glass from the Past? Have you seen Glass from the Past? Where it
is
has,
that where they live in the bunker?
Yes.
Yes, I have. That's a good movie. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
When's the next one?
2023. Where it's in debate. It's either June 30th or we might push it to the fall. We haven't decided. Yeah.
Who invented oriented strand board?
Who invented oriented strand board?
And when
Plywood
did it start
company.
coming on really strong?
70s. Yeah. Pretty early. Yeah.
I drive around a lot of these neighborhoods like Ridgewood, West Cliff, and I'm really surprised at a whole block, you might find one, mid-century modern. What we find is I think it's a ranch style that has been made with colonial. When these were done in the 50s,
Well, my PowerPoint didn't save properly because I had a whole bunch of pictures that show that we look at those modern houses that are so cool and sleek. That's not what you find in the neighborhoods. You find houses that are Tudor ranches. You find colonial ranches. My house was going to be the picture board, the poster child of the thing because I live in a ranch style house built in '62 that is undefinable. It's just there's a steel window and there's a wood window and it's low pitch and there's a little column. It's just what? It just doesn't make any sense. That I agree with what you're saying that's typically what you find in those neighborhoods. Yes.
I just had a question because we have a lot of neighbors, where first they built their house in Levitt, and they will tell you up and down that the quality of our houses are way better than what they're building now. Like, is that true? Because I mean, just from what you're saying, it's like
I think it's
but
true.
They will tell you up and down.
I think it's true because materials, like you looked at that slide, products are even cheaper now than they were. Like they made cheaper products, but then they started making things out of masonite, which, it's paper. It's not wood. And so there are a bunch of fake products being put into houses today are disposable, in my opinion. Or a lot of houses today are disposable because they're built so cheap and fast. This is the tragedy that Levitt started, right? That he invented a way to build cheaper and faster, but he taught a generation of builders how to build cheap and fast, and they taught their sons, and their sons taught and all of a sudden our houses are cheap. And so, yes, your house, and from that period of time, the materials are better, they're more longer lasting, they're designed to last longer. So I agree with that statement that they are better built than those built today. Any other questions? Sheathing? Well, like Chip and Joanna Gage did all that shiplap. That's sheathing. So sheathing is what they would put on the side of a framed house. They would sheath it in wood boards, and it keeps it from racking. They do it on the inside or the outside. Now they do it with plywood. Same with the roofs. Let's see those boards right there. That's sheathing in this as opposed to plywood. Okay, thank you for being patient. Appreciate it.